First in today's Spotlight Africa, an advisor and key ally of Malawi President Lazarus Chakwera has announced he is stepping down from his two positions due to concerns over corruption in government. Maurice Muthali said he was quitting from his two positions as the President's Special Advisor on Peace, Reconciliation and National Unity and as the spokesman for the governing Malawi Congress Party (MCP). In two separate letters, he said he was resigning from the positions after deeply and prior precedent in June 2020, promising to fight corruption when his party led an alliance of 9 political parties that defeated former President Peter Mutharika. According to a report, his tenure has, however, been tainted by numerous corruption scandals, which have seen several senior officials of his administration, some very close to him, being indicted. In another development, Mauritanian President Mohamed Ahmed Ould Ghazouani says his government has no plans to invite mercenaries from Russia's Wagner group to help in the fight against Islamist insurgents. Countries in the Sahel region, including Mauritania's neighbor Mali, are using fighters from the shadowy private military company to fight a jihadist insurgency that has left thousands dead. He also denied being approached by the Wagner group, but said he would not judge neighboring countries with ties to the group. Elsewhere, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has defended his government's decision to terminate the operations of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights OHCHR in the country. He was responding to a journalist questioning Uganda's decision to close OHCHR operations during a press conference at the Uganda South Africa Investment Forum in Pretoria on Wednesday. Recall that on the 3rd of February, Uganda's Foreign Ministry announced that the government would not renew the mandate of the OHCHR, which was set to expire at the end of March. In a letter to the OHCHR head office, the ministry stated that Uganda had developed the capacity to monitor, promote and protect human rights without external support. Rights activists and campaigners have condemned Uganda's decision to shut down the United Nations office, describing it as shameful. Moving on to another story, President Yoweri Museveni said the recently speech that he gave to his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky about food security in Africa was fielding questions from journalists at a press conference at the Uganda South Africa Investment Forum held in Pretoria. Recall that the two leaders held a telephone conversation on the 22nd of February in which they talked about the potential for developing bilateral relations. Meanwhile, fuel and food prices have skyrocketed around the world since February last year when Russia invaded Ukraine. Africa is heavily dependent on grain supplies from the two countries that together account for about 29% of global wheat exports. Uganda has continued to state its neutrality over the Ukraine-Russia war. In the meantime, 2 survivors of the 1921 massacre of black people in the U.S. city of Tulsa have been granted Ghanaian citizenship. Viola Fletcher, 108, and her brother Hugs Van Ellis, 102, are 2 of the 3 living survivors. About 300 black residents of Greenwood, a prosperous town then known as Black Wall Street, were murdered and their homes and businesses destroyed by a mob of white people. The citizenship ceremony took place at Ghana's embassy in Washington, D.C. Fletcher, known as Mother Fletcher, and Van Ellis, also known as Uncle Red, visited Ghana in August of 2021 as part of a week-long tour of Africa to mark the centenary of the killings. Known as the Tulsa Race Massacre, the pair will become dual citizens, the Washington Post report, citing comments made at the ceremony by Hajia Alima Mahama, Ghana's U.S. ambassador. The Justice for Greenwood Foundation, which works with survivors of the massacre and their descendants, said the pair have become the oldest African Americans to be granted citizenship of Ghana. Meanwhile, Ivory Coast and Guinea are dispatching specially chartered aircraft to Tunisia to bring hundreds of their citizens back home. Officials in both Conakry and Yamoussoukro expressed alarm at inflammatory comments made last week by the Tunisian President Kais Saied. Saied said that illegal migration was causing demographic changes in the country, saying those who were there illegally would not be allowed to stay. He accused them of being behind rising crime in Tunisia. He also instructed Tunisian security forces to take urgent measures against undocumented migrants from sub-Saharan Africa. According to reports, dozens of Guineans and Ivorians have sought refuge in their countries' embassies. Some have reportedly been physically assaulted. In a separate development, civil society and human rights groups have called on the United Nations to block efforts by the Ethiopian government to end an independent probe into crimes allegedly committed during a brutal civil war in the country's north. The more than 60 organizations include Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. In a letter written to the United Nations Human Rights Council member states, the organization said they were alarmed by plans by Addis Ababa to present a resolution that seeks to cut short a United Nations mandated inquiry. Meanwhile, Ethiopia has resisted the United Nations International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia since its inception in 2021, calling it politically motivated, and had previously attempted to cut its funding. Meanwhile, over 1,000 Kenyan traders have reportedly protested in the capital Nairobi against Chinese traders. Reports say the demonstration comes in the wake of controversy elicited by the coming of China's square retail outlets of general merchandise, whose prices are on average 45% lower than those prevailing in locally owned enterprises. Meanwhile, Trade Minister Moses Kuria has offered to take over China's squares, leased from its Chinese owner, and hand it to local traders. But Korea Singoi, the principal secretary at Kenya's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, stressed on Twitter that all investors are welcome, irrespective of their nationality. In the meantime, Burkina Faso has scraped a 1961 agreement on military assistance with France, a move that comes only weeks after it told the French ambassador and troops supporting its anti-jihad. The Burkinabe Foreign Ministry advised the French government that the country was renouncing the technical military assistance agreement reached in Paris on April 24, 1961. Meanwhile, the accord was fudged of as Burkina Faso used to be called and colonial state. Elsewhere, the state-run news agency in Somalia says at least 10 Al-Shabaab militants have been killed in a security operation in the central Hiran region. It said those killed in the engagement included 3 senior commanders of the Islamist group, adding that the National Intelligence Agency and international partner forces were involved. Al-Shabaab has lost large areas of territory in recent months in the face of an offensive by Somalia's military working with the African Union, US forces and clan militia, but it continues to launch attacks in the capital Mogadishu and some neighboring countries. Away from that, a section of members of parliament from the conflict-hit North Kivu province in the Democratic Republic of Congo wants President Felix Tshisekedi to consider engaging the M23 rebel group. In an open letter, the members of parliament said a peaceful settlement would de-escalate the ongoing conflict in eastern DR Congo that has displaced hundreds of thousands in the past year. The legislators have demanded to be involved in peace initiatives seeking to resolve the security crisis in the region. They want humanitarian corridors and roads blocked in areas affected by the conflict to be opened. Meanwhile, in recent weeks, the M23 has captured villages and towns as they attempt to advance towards the regional capital, Goma. The group was scheduled to commence withdrawal from positions they occupied in recent offensives, beginning Tuesday for a period of 1 month. It is not clear if the rebels have complied with the retreat plan. The M23 has engaged government forces in heavy fighting for most of February. Burkina Faso craves 1961 military pact with French. Stay tuned for the rest of the stories on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned, and now to the rest of the stories on Spotlight Africa. Flooding in Mozambique has isolated the town of Mabote in the southern province of Inhambane, with the Methane-Mabote Road, the only land connected to the rest of the province, cut off. Provincial roads official Daddy Mendes explained that heavy rains that hit the province after the landfall of tropical cyclone Freddy made it difficult for vehicles and people to move around. He said the rains destroyed close to 700 kilometers of roads across the province, disrupting traffic. Meanwhile, in the city of Berea, in the central Sofala province, the number of families looking for accommodation centers continues to increase because their homes are flooded. In another development, an Italian firm contracted by French energy giant Total Energies said today it was gearing up to resume work on a Mozambique gas project that was halted for security reasons in 2021 as soon as July. Total Energies has long been cautious about the possibility of restarting operations on the $20 billion onshore liquefied natural gas project in the African country's restive Cabo Delgado province. But CIPEB, an energy servicing company tasked with the project's development, said that following talks with the French firm, it expected operations to restart soon. Meanwhile, Rwandan refugees in Mozambique have described as frightening the ratification of an extradition treaty between the two countries. A spokesman for the refugees said he believed it would be used to prosecute opponents of the government in Kigali. A number of Rwandan descendants have been murdered in southern Africa in recent years. Reports say one was shot dead 2 years ago in the Mozambican capital. Another was found floating in the sea in 2012. Meanwhile, Rwandan troops have been deployed to Mozambique to help fight an Islamic insurgency. At least 14 people have died, 7 in Madagascar and 7 in Mozambique following a tropical cyclone. According to the latest United Nations situation report, the number of people affected by Cyclone Freddy has also risen to 383,000. That includes 226,000 in Madagascar and more than 163,300 in Mozambique. Flooding is unlikely in southeastern Zimbabwe as Cyclone Freddy did not extend as far inland as previously forecasted. Elsewhere, security forces in Benin repulsed an attack at a military base in the north of the country. The website of a privately owned daily 24 AU Benin has reported. Reports say unidentified gunmen attacked the Gaoundé military base in the Altako department near the border with neighboring Togo and Burkina Faso. Benin, like Togo, has seen increased cross-border incursions from militants based in Burkina Faso since the middle of 2022. Meanwhile, there has been no official statement from the authorities about casualties or ongoing operations by the army following the attack. Meanwhile, at least 17 passengers have been injured, 2 of them seriously, after a Condor Airlines flight from Frankfurt, Germany to Mauritius was hit by severe turbulence. The plane was caught in the severe turbulence while flying near Madagascar 2 hours before its scheduled landing in Mauritius. Footage of the plane's interior showed damages. According to Mauritius police, there were 270 passengers on board flight DE2314 during the incident today. Lastly, on Spotlight Africa, when news spread that a massive earthquake had hit Turkey and Syria in February, the children of Becky's Foundation, a residential home and school in Ghana, started praying. A young man, many refer to as Uncle or Father Christian, was lost in the before his current scene hit Haspor. Before the children, he was a pillar of support who would appear unexpectedly on visit, bearing football shirts and leading the children in games. The director of the project said Asiedu remembers the first time he visited. It was like a festival. And that's all we have for you at this time. Don't sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtv.ng. You have been watching Spotlight Africa.